Good day, it's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of On the Line. You know, interesting question came my way that I felt that I can answer on this platform. We touched on it before on the Tear Talk YouTube channel, but I felt that we could explore it again here on the Guardian channel with two of my guests, which will be retired Major Professor Luis Soto and retired Health Administrator Connie Alleyne. And what we're going to talk about is what happens when you have an employee who comes in under the influence, whether it's from, pills or whether it's alcohol. And if you're an employee that notices this, and this is one of your peers, what is going to be expected of you, what it is that you need to do. And I know there's conflict here because the action that you need to take is probably the action that you don't want to take. So at this point, I'm just going to highlight this because I mentioned this in our last episode. Sometimes trust is just a perspective. And I don't know if I want to make that into a shirt, but at this point here, the action that you need to take is probably in conflict with what you want to do, but trust and heed in the advice you're given, because at the end, you will also be held responsible if you know something and you don't properly report it. But again, let's just introduce our guest. Hey, Soto, do you mind introducing yourself again to our audience?
Yeah, how we doing? Again, I'm retired Major Luis Soto. I worked 25 years with the New Jersey Department of Corrections. I was the major there, basically a chief in a precinct. Basically, that's what I was. And now I am teaching at Rutgers University as a professor in the Criminal Justice Department. Happy to be here.
Always happy to have you, Luis. And by the way, guys, check out his last video he did for us, because he actually did a video where we talked about crossing into the frontline supervisory position, what to expect, that higher level perspective. And maybe he'll do another video about when you cross into that administrative level, because Luis has obviously gone up the ranks, so he has multiple perspectives. And now we have Connie Alleyne, our fellow podcast host and trainer. Connie, what's going on? How you doing?
Hi, Connie Alleyne here, founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. And I'm also podcast host for The Fly Behind the Wall and criminal justice professor at Monroe College. So I am looking forward to this conversation because this one is a sticky one.
Yes. Now, I'm actually going to forward the dialogue really to you guys, because I've discussed this before on the Tear Talk YouTube channel. So if you want to catch my perspective, and I believe, I forgot who I had on with me if I had a guest, but I've given a perspective. Please, guys, check out the YouTube channel for that. But I want to give respect to my guests, and I want to make sure that they get their perspective in, because we're going to have two. We're going to have custody and we're going to have medical. And some good news today. A lot of our videos are actually being used for training across the country. So, guys, if you get these videos and you want to utilize them for training, I have no problem with you guys downloading it off the YouTube channel. I'm not going to sue you for copyright infringement. I know it's going for the right reasons. So, feel free to use it for the right reasons, by the way. I don't want you downloading and then using it for something else. Use it to train. Okay, so I guess first we'll start off with custody. But, the question that came my way a while back was about an officer who knew that a peer was coming in under the influence. They even mentioned to the officer that, hey, listen, your actions are kind of being made evident, like you can actually see it. And they try to motivate the officer to do the right thing, but unfortunately the officer is being resistant to that, and the officer was concerned about what to do next. And their main reason being is they feel that there's a conflict. Like, Soto, you're going to tell us exactly what to do next, but maybe you can explain why someone may have a conflict with what's doing what needs to be done.
Well, as you work with your colleagues years in, years out, you create that bond, and that if you find someone that's inebriated coming to work in any sort of other state than the normal state, it could affect you. It could affect others. It could affect their job performance. It could even get them hurt. So, what you want to do is take the person. If we were out in the street, hey, I'm going to drive you home. I'm not going to let you drive. Hey, I'm going to take you and protect you. But in the job scene where you're at work, you're guided by some policies and procedures as well that, if you don't do the right thing, you may be held accountable for the actions of that particular individual, or your own actions for not reporting it and then being found out later that, hey, you knew that this guy was inebriated, drunk, or in an altered state, and you said nothing. So it's kind of hard, but sometimes we have to do the right thing for the benefit of everyone.
Soto, I agree. I actually said that on my talk as well when I did it, was that the conflict is that, yes, after you try to motivate the person to do the right thing and the person chooses not to, I think that person is actually being disrespectful to you now, because they know that there's a concern and now they're actually not doing the right thing, even though they know that you could be in trouble if something goes wrong. And it was also quick to mention that an employee that's under the influence is also a risk to safety and security. It could build a lot of greater concerns, including if there's an addiction that the person is overwhelmed by, which could make them easily to be corrupted by an inmate. So I agree with you, obviously, 100%. Do you see the same thing with medical? I mean, what's the liability there? And, you know, would it be tough for a nurse to report on one of their peers if they were under the influence?
So unfortunately, I had the experience twice in my career of having staff come in who were under the influence. You know, turned out that they had bigger issues than what we could handle internally. But the reality for us is that as a clinical person, you know, you have access to medication. So the liability kind of shifts to something a bit greater. So of course we have the concern of dealing with, you know, those employees who may come in and then, you know, the person who's working alongside them, of course, feels like they need to step up and say something, but they feel uncomfortable doing that. The other side of that, though, is if this is my partner and we're doing meds in mental health and this person is like messing up, like this could really be life or death. So the liability is so great when you think about someone who could be under the influence and providing meds. I think the other thing where we find ourselves really challenged is when we start missing meds, right? You know, if someone has any addiction issues, our challenge of you having access to meds and then they start going missing, it compromises the entire operation, you know? And so we have had to literally either escort people off or, you know, contact central office to make sure they were aware of the actions that had to be taken. I had a situation with someone, you could smell the alcohol on this person. I mean, it turned out that they had other underlying medical issues that they were almost self-medicating. But it's certainly not anything that's safe. And unfortunately, we can't necessarily just send that person home because they're under the influence. And so the steps we take are, we look to first informing custody that this is happening, because I have a responsibility to also report up that something like this is happening in the facility. And then once that happens, we could either call 911 and have that person taken to an ER. But you know, there's always someone that'll say, let me take them home, right? And so you've got coworkers who would actually want to take them home, but we actually have to have someone come and pick them up from facility and take them home. I can't necessarily let someone on the clock go off grounds to do something personal that's not work related.
Right. I also like to add that management should have some type of employee assistance program to motivate people who do have a substance abuse to step up and not be afraid of a consequence, because the concern is that if you don't step up, there will be a real consequence, because obviously there'll be a liability. And that's what I want to cross into before we come to a close. And again, the dialogue I had on my channel was about 13 minutes. Some of it was revisited, but we didn't have the perspective of medical before. And then there was definitely some dialogue that Soto touched on, which we didn't cover, obviously, from my perspective. But I also want to touch on one more thing, which is the liability. So when this person brought this to my attention, I knew they knew what the answer was. I knew that they knew the answer was, we have to report this individual, but they were hesitant. That's where Soto was quick to definitely agree with the fact that there's a trust there, you know, and that's why, you know, I say trust sometimes is a perspective, you know, because maybe I am helping you, you know, but you may not see it that way because of, your mind's not where it needs to be. But the concern I have is that I knew that this person knew what to do, but there was a conflict with that. And I knew the video was really a motivational piece to motivate that person to do the right thing, report what needs to be done, and that you're not alone. So sometimes these videos serve a greater purpose. The fact that you know what to do, but you're afraid that you stand alone, because there were some comments that I got that said, don't be a rat. And right off the bat, I deleted the comment and I removed it. I wasn't going to go back and forth on that. I just deleted it and removed it. But just to further motivate, and I'll start with Connie first, because you touched onto it a little bit, is what is some of the liability for the person who doesn't report it, who knows it and doesn't do nothing?
So certainly they can, as the investigation ensues, they would be probably possibly suspension. I mean, there is some liability there because we have a professional responsibility to protect our patients, the inmate patients, right? I mean, yes, you would think this is your colleague. You want to be able to protect your colleague as well, but your obligation professionally is to that inmate patient who could be put in danger by your coworker who's under the influence. Then we have to look at, you know, how do we manage that person who does need support, right? Like that person does need to go into to seek out EAP or something like that so that they have some way of getting what they need so that they're fit for duty, right? Because that's the next thing that comes into question. If this person has an addiction, are they fit for duty? And so not necessarily taking that person off duty, but how do we make sure that we, before they come back to work, that they are stable?
Right. It's a lot of responsibility on the person who is able to see it, because once it's made evident, there's going to be a point where you can't deny it. And again, that's where you're going to be held at that high level of responsibility as well. And so I'd like to ask you the same question before we wrap it up.
Yeah, unfortunately, you know, in this day and age, you know, you can't sit there and try to cover up anything, any wrongdoing. You just got to remember that you're not the one doing anything wrong. Maybe you're the one that is going to instigate this individual to get some help. You know, maybe you're the person that, you know, finally gets through and says, you know what, you actually need some help. You know, the penalties are there. We probably all know what the penalties are. They're spelled out in our profession about wrongdoing, about liability. You know, it can go up as much as being fired, which is an unfortunate thing for something you might not have done. You're just trying to help a fellow co-worker who you don't want to get in trouble, but in the instance, you're probably getting in trouble yourself.
But before we go to close, I just want to also remind people that if someone has to step up and do it, you know it's the right thing. You know, show support, because in the end, a lot of us are afraid to do it because we feel that our peers are going to turn against us, and we don't bring that situation on us. That person brought that situation to us. And most of the time, if you were in our shoes, you'd be doing the same thing. But when you're not, you tend to pass on fair judgment, and that stops somebody from doing the right thing. But unfortunately, that's not going to be enough if it ever goes to court and there's a liability. You know, I can't easily say, well, if I reported it, my peers would turn their back against me. You can't. You have to do the right thing, and that right thing should be supported by your peers. So as always, guys, the show is on the line. Don't forget, we try to get a show out there every Friday, so please subscribe to this channel. And also check us out on the Tier Talk venue as well. We also have a Tier Talk podcast. And see you next week. Stay safe, everyone.